Playing the dating game after divorce. Sudan begins releasing political prisoners as tensions ease with its southern neighbour. The two countries were pushed to the brink of war after an acrimonious separation. So how are they surviving as singles? And can past differences ever be fully resolved? This is Inside Story. Hello, warm welcome to the programme with me, David Foster. It is almost 2 years since South Sudan split from Sudan to become the world's newest country. Sudan President Omar al Bashir has announced an amnesty now for all political prisoners held in Sudan and has released a number accused of links with southern rebels. All supposed to be part of building on progress made last month when the two countries agreed to end hostilities and resume the cross-border flow of oil. And as a sign of mellowing relations, Bashir is said to be making arrangements for his first visit to South Sudan. Harriet Martin now, who's been following developments from Khartoum.
The announcement on Monday night that this government would be releasing all political detainees seems to be part of a wider pattern of rapprochement towards all its so-called political enemies. Now that includes South Sudan. Over the last few weeks, we've seen for the first time in 6 months the implementation of a comprehensive peace deal signed between the two sides. And so we've seen the establishment of a demilitarized zone on the border. And in coming weeks, we are expecting to see oil flow. But there are still many questions being asked. How sincere is this government in this change of direction? And what will be the consequences? Does it really mean it wants sustained political dialogue with its domestic opposition as well as sustained political engagement with South Sudan itself?
Let's introduce our guest in Khartoum, Issam Abu Hassabu, a member of the National Consensus Forces, which is a coalition of Sudanese opposition parties. From Boston, in the United States, Luca Deng, former South Sudanese Minister for Presidential Affairs. And in Oxford, David Anderson, Professor of African Politics at the University of Oxford. Gentlemen, warm welcome to Inside Story to all three of you. Professor Anderson, if I can come to you first of all, it's going to be very difficult to speculate about the reasons why Bashir's visit to South Sudan is now only a possibility rather than the definite it was just a few days ago. But I suppose it just illustrates that things between the two nations are still pretty shaky.
Yes, it's a very delicate relationship, and it's bound to be. To follow on the analogy of your introduction, we are only just out of the divorce courts. We are two countries who really are very suspicious of each other, and it's taken quite a bit of diplomatic manoeuvring to get us to the position where they're even prepared to talk. So I think things are still finely poised.
Mr. Deng in Boston, in December of last year, you wrote the government of South Sudan should rule out any serious business with Sudan and it should manage its oil sector as if it has no border with Sudan under Bashir. And yet now we're seeing oil being produced in the next week or so. We're going to see it moving across the border down to Port Sudan. It's not normality, but it is a step on that road. So what, in your opinion, has changed?
Oh, well, definitely. I think definitely some of these developments are quite encouraging. But I think the context of Sudan, especially with the NCP, one should be quite cautious to what level you can become optimistic, given the history that consistently showing that this is a government you cannot trust. But definitely, let me underscore the following. One would really need to see what is going to happen in the next few days to come. First, whether the Bashir will be visiting South Sudan or not, that will show a clear intention. The information we have now seems to suggest there will be difficulty for Bashir to visit Juba, because given the fact that Ra'al Am, for example, of the National Congress Party, put very clearly that the Bashir will not be visiting, and recently also you may need to look at the Sudan media service that actually released information today accusing Juba, that is so linked with Israel, to obstruct the implementation of the cooperation agreement. Equally, also even accusing Juba, they have been hosting Mani Manawi, who is the leader of the Sudan Liberation Movement of Darfur. So I think we need to be clear. But there's no doubt there's an opportunity that the regime in Khartoum might have felt the economic pressure and is facing a very serious dynamics within the party, given the fact that Bashir is going to step down.
Yeah,
so there's a likelihood that they may use it as
sorry to interrupt you.
So
we're looking at the economy in just a moment. Right now, let's cast our mind back a couple of years. Sudan was, until 2011, the biggest country in Africa. It got independence from British and Egyptian rule in 1956. Relies primarily on agriculture until 1999, and then it started exporting oil. By 2008, despite civil war and famines in the Darfur region, it was a relatively rich country, and then there was the split, with oil output all but shut down. Two countries both need each other because 75% of the oil is in the south and all the refineries at the moment are in the north. In the past few weeks, though, South Sudan has announced its first ever refinery planned for later on this year. Another interesting point, perhaps, Sudan has just released its first official figures for gold exports, more than $2 billion worth. For the moment, that makes it Sudan's biggest export product, ahead of oil. Issam Abu Hassabu, let me go to you in Khartoum. Sudan is trying to attract other countries to invest in its infrastructure. How successful has that been?
As far as I know, Sudan hasn't been successful in attracting any international community support because of the long list of negative positions the government of Sudan has put itself in. I think this regime has very much been following a policy of day-to-day routine, whether it is mining for gold or oil. We have always known that Sudan is basically a cultural country. Its economy is based on agriculture and animal resources. So unless we do something serious about this, no other alternative in economics would be can substitute these basic sources of economy in Sudan.
Well, successful or not, Sudan is reaching out abroad to try and encourage more investment. A delegation was in Pakistan this week from Sudan, and one Pakistani businessman who's been trading in Sudan for many years joins us now, Mohammed Iftikhar. Mr. Iftikhar, first of all, tell us, what business are you in?
We are in the agriculture business. We grow different type of crops here in Sudan. And we also manufacture agriculture implements.
Is it easier to do business now than it was 5 years ago, or is it more difficult?
No, it's not more difficult, it's more easy now, but there is some inflation problem. I hope with the new agreement with South Sudan, they will control these things.
Have the tensions between Sudan and South Sudan affected your business then?
We are in the North Sudan, in Khartoum, and our farm is around 200 kilometers in the north side of Khartoum. We have no effect on this.
People, do they have less money to buy your products now than they did have?
No, we are in the agribusiness and mainly food products. We don't have any problem. We export some animal feed to Middle East, so we feel okay.
I mentioned the fact that a delegation from Sudan went to your country, to Pakistan, to persuade businesses to go and invest there. If you had had your say, what would you have told your countrymen?
Yeah, in my opinion, in agriculture, Central Sudan is still have a lot of possibilities.
What sort of opportunities, sir?
Agriculture, growing on large scale food crops.
And in terms of the stability of the country, because an awful lot of people hear about, or have heard over the years, about fighting that there has been in the West, the problems in the South. Do you feel any security concerns at all?
No, not in North, comparatively to any other African country. North is very peaceful. and we feel very secure here.
And Mr. Iftikhar, finally, do you plan to expand? Are the conditions right for you to grow your business? I know it's agricultural, but in monetary terms rather than just in plant terms.
Yeah, we are now started from last year growing high grade rice here, long grain aromatic rice, and rice demand is growing every day, and we have a joint venture with the Ministry of Agriculture, and we're expanding our farm up to 10,000 acres within the next 2 years.
Well, Mohammed Iftikhar, we thank you very much indeed. Good to have you with us here on Inside Story. So David Anderson, what was it? The Sudanese government said it would be cutting spending by, I think it was roughly 25% in 2012. It hasn't managed to do anything like that. Such drastic cuts point to a country that really does need to save money, but a government that's completely incapable of doing so.
Yes, I think it's a government that doesn't really have control of its own economy. And as we've just indicated in the discussion, that there's not a lot they can do. So their room for manoeuvre is quite tight. This is why the oil situation is so crucial. But I think looking ahead, both countries for the next 2 to 3 years need the oil to flow through Sudan to Port Sudan. It'll take the South Sudanese another 3 years to fully develop their refinery. It may take them even longer to develop the piping networks that they need to export it in a different direction. This is a medium-term game, not a short-term game. And so the rapprochement we're seeing at the moment is really a way of dealing with the short-term problems. Both countries have major fiscal problems.
Give me your view on the political situation regarding the disputed border region, and then I'll go to Mr. Deng and ask him to talk about how he thinks people are managing to live there, the situation on the ground. But Professor Anderson first, where do we stand in terms of any kind of peace deal there?
I think this is critical because although we focus on the oil because that's the resource, the real issue on the ground is in fact the relationship between populations along that border. There's been a long history of resettling people into that border area from the north, and that has disrupted the relationships between agriculturalists and pastoralists all the way along that border. And even when you solve the oil problem, you will not solve that social problem of those resettlement schemes in the border areas. And until that is addressed, there will be continual conflict along that border, almost regardless of what the national governments do. But the real pity is that in the last 2 years, I think the North has done a great deal to stimulate the conflicts on those borders. So the North has to stop doing that as well.
Mr. Deng, I believe you run a charity out of the United States which tries to help people in that area in particular. Give us your view on how they're managing, or whether they're managing at all there, given the conflict there's been.
I think, as mentioned by previous speaker, I think the real test for the long-term viability of the two states is how they are going to manage their border. And Abyei in point, Abyei is an area that is having a joint sovereignty. There are a lot of provisions. African Union has come with a proposal, and that proposal, as we talk now, Sudan government consistently rejected conduct of a referendum in Abyei area. And this is an area, the spark of the first civil war was coming from Abyei. These are the people who have a very genuine political issues that has been resolved in the CPA, but indeed by the African Union. But Sudan is refusing that one. For me, that is going to be a flashpoint. And that will be a test for the two countries. To what level would they go beyond, to resolve the issue of Abyei? And the visit of Bashir, if it's going to happen, I think on the top of the agenda, it would be important for them to resolve that issue of Abyei.
I'm going to go to Mr. Hasabu in just a moment to talk about how strong he believes President Bashir is or isn't. But I'd like to run through some of the crucial dates in all of this. Sudan's government signing a peace deal with southern rebels in 2005. That ended a 23-year civil war. Laid the groundwork for a referendum on southern independence, but there was a wait, long one in fact, until July 2011 when the South voted overwhelmingly to separate from Sudan. 2012 brought fighting, as we've been talking about, over the contested border region, the sharing of oil revenues, the South saying the North's actions amounted to a declaration of war. And in September of that year, the respective presidents, well, eventually shaking hands, reaching an agreement on trade, oil and security after days of talks in Ethiopia. It's a little bit rocky since then in past weeks. They have gone further, though, agreeing to resume pumping oil and to withdraw troops from the border area. Mr. Hassabu, in Khartoum, you're part of the opposition, so I want to ask you about how strong you think President Omar Bashir's position is, partly in light of the fact that there is still an ICC, an International Criminal Court warrant out for his arrest.
I'm afraid one can safely say that there hasn't been radical change. I mean, even if you take the president's statement yesterday in the inauguration of the seventh session of the legislature, people are overblowing the picture in a way. That the statement he made about the detainees, releasing the detainees, is in fact has wrong implications, because you're talking about detainees, pardoning detainees that have not been detained for any good reason to begin with.
But is his position,
if we are talking about
a strong one? Does he have support from within his own regime, or is he perhaps being undermined by those who are quite close to him, as well as by opposition politicians such as yourself?
Of course he does have support from within his party, but this is only a facade that's meant to be to serve a certain purpose. This regime has been using a stick without any carrot at all. The pardoning of the detainees means that they have you have detained some people without any charges for 3 months almost, and you just pardon them without explaining the violation of their rights.
So what I'm driving at,
credibility,
if I may push it on just a little bit and go to David Anderson in Oxford, is Omar Bashir's been in charge for a very long time now. If he were for any reason to fall, should we expect moderation in Sudan's relationship with the South, or are those around Omar al Bashir perhaps more extreme than he is?
Well, I think that's a very good question, because the real problem for Bashir seems to me to be within his own party rather than the opposition. And if we're being candid about it, the release of the political prisoners was for Bashir no big deal. These people can be picked up again at any time. This is a gesture that doesn't really cost him very much. And it will no doubt have cost him something internally that he might have to handle in the coming weeks. There are elements within Sudan's ruling party who think that Bashir is not firm enough, not strong enough, and would like to see a more robust government. There are, of course, some others who are more liberal and would like things to be different. But I think managing those internal dynamics for Bashir is a far more difficult challenge than managing the opposition. And that is, I think, something that we need to keep in sight.
Thank you. Thanks very much indeed, Professor Anderson. There, I'm going to read out some Facebook comments right now, because we invite you to send us your thoughts before the programme when you know what the subject is. And then I'm going to go back to our two Sudanese guests to try and wrap this up a little bit. First of all, Brian Ndwani says, yes, they will emerge stronger as different entities, especially South Sudan, will enjoy much more freedom than North Sudan. Habassa Vivian writes, the only way for these two to emerge stronger and grow is by sorting out their differences and solving their political disputes. White Hassan says, doubtless the only way out of this crisis is by cooperation and by doing what it takes to implement the peace process. Momo Binu Abdirahman writes, very easy to point the blame, very hard to act. Luca Byong Deng in Boston for us. former South Sudanese presidential advisor. Look back a couple of years, 2011, South Sudan created. Is it in a stronger position now vis-à-vis its relationship with its bigger northern neighbour, or has very little changed?
Oh, certainly. I think there is no doubt that as a newest nation, I think it's facing a lot of challenges, and one of them is how to manage its relationship with its neighbors, and especially given the fact that it is a landlocked country with enormous resources. There is no doubt they would have done better, given the fact that if they were to have a good relationship with Sudan. But I think Sudan adopted a strategy of strangling economically the South. But surprisingly, I could say that the South is emerging out of the difficulties, and even within being a landlocked country. Look at the exchange rate. For example, the South Sudanese pound relatively is far powerful than the Sudanese pound. And they have a high level of resilience because the economy is in such a way, it's not like in Sudan, whereby the rural economy of the South is so linked from the urban setting. All those shocks that happened because of the action of Sudan did not affect the rural South Sudan. But there's no doubt that and I think also the very fact that they have stopped the oil has made them to think into themselves, to look for other options rather than depending on oil and depending on its relationship with Sudan. And I think you could see, as you mentioned earlier, the very fact they're looking for the refinery, I think it's a positive thing. The very fact they're looking for a feasibility study for an alternative pipeline is a positive thing. Those theoretical measures that they have taken, I think is quite telling and quite reassuring. In fact, also the international community, there will be a conference in Washington on the 16th to 17th, is about to mobilize the donors in order to support the South. I think those ones could tell me that I think South is emerging, I think, in the long run to be a very strong economic entity.
Mr. Hassabu, is Sudan stronger now without its southern sibling, or is it weaker?
No way. Definitely much weaker, and we're talking about integrated economy of the south and the north. Definitely, we are going to witness weaker and weaker economy, and even depending on oil revenue or the transport fees that will be paid will not solve the problem. We are talking about a budget that has been declared in the parliament recently with a deficit of 42%. I don't think that we will see a Sudan with a better economy, with all these features, without the South or without any real reformation policies.
Okay, and I would just like to throw this, if I may, to Professor Anderson to wrap up this inside story. In many ways, the North has been painted over the years as the bad big brother, if you like, and yet there are allegations of massive corruption in the South and the dangers of a new country like this becoming a puppet, many people suggest, of the West. So far, how right or how wrong has the South got it?
Well, the South's had a very difficult birth, and there's no doubt at all that they've struggled to meet the challenges. Within the South, there is now substantial evidence of quite significant maladministration by the government. Corruption has been out of control in some areas, and the government has found it really difficult to deliver on even its basic needs, strategies and policies. So there is really, I think, a crisis of leadership emerging in the South. And that is going to come to a head during the next few months, because for the first couple of years, I think the international community who supported the South has been willing to be tolerant. But that tolerance is going to run out in the next 6 months. And the South is going to have to step up to the mark and perform better. At the moment, I'm afraid to say there's not much evidence that they can do that. Maybe they've got time yet to sort it out, but they need to act quickly.
Time for me, in fact, to run through the entire cast. This gives them our thanks. Issam Abu Hassabu in Khartoum, Luca Bjorn Deng joining us from Boston, and David Anderson from the City of Spires from Oxford. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. You can find this programme and many more on our website, aljazeera.com. Just follow the links for programmes and Inside Story and leave your comments there too. Thanks again for watching. From me, David Foster, and the rest of the Inside Story team. Goodbye for now. See you next time.